Hi, good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking to you today. I'm Thomas Ozers, a Programme Manager with the Digital Office for Scottish Local Government. Now, as my job title might have tipped you off, I'm not actually any kind of expert on cloud technologies. And unlike some of the speakers here today, I'm not going to talk to you about cutting-edge new innovations in cloud. In fact, a lot of the benefits I'm going to cover in this talk are absolutely fundamental to a cloud-based approach and will be familiar to all of you. But what I do know about and what the Digital Office specialises in is delivering digital transformation. And what I want to show you this morning is how the program I lead, the Shared Arc program, is going to harness the benefits of a cloud-based approach to deliver transformational change to the telecare sector in Scotland. So first, a little bit of context and background for you all. Telecare is the most common form of care and support in Scotland, and we currently have around 180,000 citizens using these services. At its absolute most basic, you have a button and a box. So an alarm box which plugs into the phone line and a pendant which the citizen can wear. They can trigger an alarm either using that pendant or at the box, and that will put them through to an alarm receiving centre, which I will refer to as an ARC for the rest of this presentation. And there, a trained operator will provide support and ensure a suitable response to their problem is mobilised. We then have more complicated packages which can involve a whole range of additional peripheral devices which plug into that alarm. So things like environmental sensors like heat, smoke and flood. We have fall detectors, motion sensors, so sensors which sit under a mattress or a chair cushion, so you can tell if somebody has been sitting still for too long, and even door sensors, so in the case of people suffering from dementia, you can see if they're leaving their home at an unusual time. So as I'm sure you can guess, this kind of service brings enormous benefits to the citizens who receive it. It helps them stay in their own home for longer, retain their independence, and ultimately allows them to live the life they choose. It also has huge benefits for the wider health and social care sector, both in terms of reducing admissions to hospital and being able to speed up discharge through having a supported home environment. In 2017, Deloitte did a report into this, and they found that the telecare sector in Scotland annually generates benefits of around 99 million. So two-thirds of that accrue to social care, and a third of it accrues to the NHS. These services in Scotland are currently delivered by 33 different telecare services, and they use 23 different alarm receiving centres. So you have a number of alarm receiving centres which are used by more than one service. So hopefully at this point I've kind of given you a bit of an idea of why there is so much value to the telecare sector and the benefits. It is fair to say that telecare is currently going through the biggest upheaval it has ever and likely will ever face. And before I start to look at those challenges and explain how we're proposing to meet them, I'll first introduce the programme I'm leading. So we launched the Shared Arc programme earlier this year, and we have two key goals here. We're seeking to expedite and simplify telecare services transition to digital technology, and we're also looking to create a platform to drive innovation. We're going to do this through taking a common platform approach. Now, this does have something of a checkered history, particularly in the public sector, but through our carefully crafted approach, we believe we're not only going to be successful, but that we can deliver true transformational change. And you can see some of the key features behind me. It's cloud-based, and that is why I'm here speaking with you today. Put simply, without taking a cloud-based approach to this solution, it wouldn't be feasible, both in times of cost, complexity, and time. So it's absolutely core to what we're doing. Multi-tenant. We're not looking to reduce the number of those 23 different ARCs in Scotland. And so what we're looking for is a multi-tenant cloud solution where we can have a logically separated instance for each service using the software. It's going to be and has been co-created. So we're currently working with a group of 14 services from across Scotland who jointly represent around 55% of the telecare market. With them, we have been designing this system from the ground up. So far, we've completed our technical specification, and we're just ready to launch our procurement. We do need to move quickly, and I'm going to explain why shortly. So we're looking initially for an off-the-shelf solution which can be delivered from day one to ensure business continuity for these essential services. That said, we don't want to remain with that basic minimum viable product for the whole duration of the contract, and we're looking for a true industry partner who's going to work with us across the duration of the program to deliver a whole range of developments and innovations. And by bringing together those 14 organizations undertaking a national procurement, we're seeking to generate economies of scale to bring a better deal for the services involved. So now that you've got a little better idea around what the Shared Arc program is, I'll get into some of these major challenges which the sector are currently facing. So as many of you may be aware, in 2025, analog telephony in the UK will be switched off. And this is going to be a challenge for any systems which rely on voice band data, and that definitely includes Telecare. So while the day after the 2025 switch off, systems which use analog signaling protocols won't immediately stop working. It has been proven fairly conclusively that analog signaling protocols do not work reliably over digital connections. And so it's absolutely essential that all of the Telecare services in Scotland update both the software and hardware they're using to versions which rely on digital signaling protocols. This is not a theoretical thing either, which is going to happen slightly in the future. As of September next year in 2023, a national-wide stop sell will be brought into force. At that point, it will no longer be possible to buy new analog telephony products in the UK, be that as a private citizen or as a company. And telecommunication firms are already moving people over to digital lines, and I'm sure at least one of you in the room today has already switched to a digital telephony package. So this isn't a theoretical issue. People are moving right now, and Telecare services now have just under 2.5 years to complete this transition. But it isn't by any means a simple or straightforward change. Telecare services have typically sat off to the side of their organization. They have their own servers which don't typically sit on the corporate network. Now, this kind of infrastructure and setup was okay under analog, and it kind of suited that setup absolutely fine, but it isn't suitable for digital. And what we've found in the years the Digital Telecare program have been looking at this is that typically getting these servers and this infrastructure to a state which can support digital technology is a major challenge. It's also a significant and complex IT project. And typically, again, Telecare services just don't have access to the resource or the expertise required to deliver a kind of digital change project of that nature. So really, we can break this challenge down into two key components. There's time and there's complexity. And in time, you can immediately see how taking a cloud-based approach through the Shared Arc program is going to support the transition to digital. We can neatly sidestep the issues around the legacy infrastructure at services, providing that the Telecare services who join us have access to suitable internet connections. They'll be able to connect to the Shared Arc platform, and it's going to make a significantly quicker way for them to transition over to digital. It also should help bring about some small cost savings for them, because it should reduce the number of servers they're being required to maintain and also free up a little bit of estate. Now, in my initial notes for this talk, I was about to tell you that that also offered a greener option, but after this morning's introductory talks, I think we now need to do a little bit of work to make sure that we are actually offering a greener option there and we're not just greenwashing. So it's going to significantly expedite the transition to digital. Equally, by doing this as a national project, we can take a once for Scotland approach. So rather than each of our 14 adopters procuring a system and then bringing in the right technical expertise to undertake the technical due diligence and cybersecurity checks themselves, we can do that at a national level once for the system. Again, this reduces the complexity and burden on these services and provides a much quicker route through which they are going to be able to transition to digital. Another major issue for the sector at the moment really relates to a lack of standardization. And I'd say a key contributor to this is the fragmented nature of the Telecare landscape, which typically allows for little interoperability. So as I said before, you've currently got 33 different services using 23 different alarm receiving centers. While those ARCs principally use software from 3 providers, they are often on different versions of the same software. They've been set up differently, so they have different data items, different reporting and access to data. And all of this has led to a really muddled, confused picture where services are left operating in silos and there is little interoperability between them. And even if one service comes up with a great way of doing things or a new innovation, it's typically incredibly difficult, if it's possible at all, to transfer that to another service. Equally, as I've said, data and access to data is a major issue for services, and it typically leads to it not being fully utilized because of a cost-benefit analysis. So it takes so much time to pull this data together that it actually outweighs any benefits from actually analyzing that data in the end. So again, and I think before I kind of launch into how we can start to kind of change this picture a bit, it is also worth taking a step back and acknowledging that there is a really good reason for the current range of different services in Scotland. These services jointly serve a huge variety of kind of different environments and demographics, from urban to rural, island to mainland, sparse to densely populated, all with their own challenges and quirks in response. And it's the localized expertise built up by Telecare services which really enables them to get support to the people who need it. So there is a sense in which, while we need to bring about greater standardization, we need to try and get data working better for services, we also want to try and preserve that localized expertise. And again, this is how our cloud-based approach is really going to offer support here. Starting off with that latter bit, with a multi-tenant solution, it introduces a way so everybody using the same core system immediately means we can introduce standardization around key data sets and how services are operating. But then having the different logically separated parts for each service enables us, on the other hand, to preserve some of that localized processing and allow them to kind of continue operating. So it's a really good way to balance out those two things. Going back to data again, believe it or not, actually getting agreement in terms of data items is really relatively easy. Recently, the Scottish Government's Technology-Enabled Care programme undertook a piece of work, and they created a minimum national data set for Telecare, which looks at the key data items used by Telecare services. It's really simple to get the services to agree on those because it's relatively common sense and straightforward. What's always been the problem in the past is implementing that. You'd have to do it 23 different times for each different ARC, all with their own challenges. And one of the advantages of the approach of this cloud-based shared ARC solution is it will effectively let us do this once for 14 services. We can have that data set in place with the successful supplier. So from day one, services will move over and be using that. We can make reports and data easier for service to access, ensure the right APIs are in place. And all of this will help bring about that level of standardization, while at the same time not making a major disruption for staff. They're going to be transitioning to a new system regardless at the moment. They have to move from analog to digital. So we may as well get this piece done now in one for them. So through these two key ways, we really feel that moving into the cloud and with the shared ARC program, we're going to bring about some much needed standardization. Going back to that kind of picture I've just been presenting, some of you may be sitting there wondering, if you've got so many different services doing slightly different things, how on earth are you going to get them to agree on the requirements for the system? And it is one of the challenges we had to look at. But so far, working with our 14 early adopters, we were able to agree the specification for the system in just 2 months. And it's been one of the greatest successes of the program to date. And there are kind of two things at the heart of this. Firstly, as I'm sure you're going to expect me to say, Stakeholder engagement had to be absolutely at the heart of what we were doing. So we started off with really careful requirement mapping with the 14 early adopters, understanding what their needs of the system were and using that to create the first draft of the specification. And then we went through an iterative process with them, working in their feedback and holding workshops if we came across any differences in opinion. So all of this allowed us to generate a really good level of trust, support and buy-in from our early adopters. But as I'm sure you're thinking, it's only half of it. And equally, while it's great having that support, trust and buy-in, if one service on one hand wants an amazing system with all the different bells and whistles, and on the other hand, you have a service who wants a basic minimum package and they don't want all the bells and whistles, it doesn't matter how much engagement you've got, how do you reconcile those two things? And this is where the flexibility of a cloud-based approach has really supported us and enabled us to move so quickly. So for looking at the requirements from our 14 organizations, we're able to identify the common ones which every single service was asking for. And what that does is that's formed our core system. So this will be our basic minimum viable product. But on top of that, we also have identified a whole range of different functionality, like lone worker support apps, which some services want, but not all. And so the way we'll be approaching the procurement is that we want the core system, and equally we'll award additional marks for the more functionality which can be included for the same price. But if there is an additional cost for any of that functionality, then what we want is it to add it in as a kind of a modular addition. So if services want, they can select the additional modular components needed. And this way, it's going to allow us to craft a solution which can support any service in Scotland. Innovation in the telecare sector has typically been sluggish, supplier-led, and reliant on purchasing specialized equipment. And again, we really feel like this whole approach is going to support us to really change this picture and kind of turn it on its head. As I mentioned at the start, we're looking for an industry partner. And the idea will be that we want the supplier of the system to work with us over the length of the contract to look at a whole range of different developments and innovations as chosen by the adopters of the system. And through this approach, we're looking to kind of move from a supplier-led model to an industry-led model where we can start to make sure that the system is evolving to meet the needs of the services and their citizens. Equally, having everybody using that same base platform will make the rollout of these innovations as they're developed much easier. Anybody who wants to will effectively be able to sign up, and it is another major benefit of taking a cloud-based approach here. So in the coming years, one of the biggest challenges Scotland as a country is going to face is its aging population. Now, my figures might be slightly old. I think they were based on a report by Audit Scotland at the end of 2021, but at that time they were predicting that by 2043 we're going to see a 23% growth in the number of over 65s and a 71% growth in the number of over 75s in Scotland. That's enormous and is going to put significant additional pressure on the whole health and social care system and will definitely lead to increased demand for telecare. And again, this is where the inherent scalability of a cloud-based approach is going to help Scotland prepare for the future. Looking at analog setups at the moment, services are constrained in how far they can scale up by their infrastructure, and again, that won't be an issue. We're looking for the shared Arc platform to be hosted in a public cloud environment, something like Azure or AWS. And if you have that along with virtual SIP trunks, then theoretically the services can expand their offering as much as is needed to meet local demand. Not only will this help telecare services deal with this increasing challenge, it's also going to support the rest of the sector because, as I said at the start, telecare supports the wider health and social care ecosystem, and it will help reduce strain on other frontline services. And to kind of stay on that topic of future-proofing, if the last few years of global pandemic, major weather events have taught us anything, it's the absolute importance of having resilient services which can be delivered from a whole variety of different locations. Again, that is going to be a major benefit of shifting to the cloud for Telecare services. They'll no longer be wedded to being based within a building where the phone lines end and the server's located. Staff will be able to take calls from anywhere they have access to a suitable internet connection. And if we think back to what I was saying around interoperability and having a number of services in partitioned instances of kind of a common platform, then there are actually some additional benefits we could look at here. So to give you an example, you might remember Storm Arwen, which struck at the end of November last year. Now, during that weekend, some Telecare services in Scotland saw numbers of calls coming in increase by 900%. And that's not an exaggeration, 900%. It was an incredible challenge for them with exhausted staff who are kind of been working overtime over the last 2 years trying to deal with the challenging conditions of the pandemic, and that was almost a challenge too far. But if we imagine we'd had the shared ARC solution in place, you have services using this common platform, then you can also start to see how you could agree call sharing arrangements between services. So if you have one service who are experiencing a sudden drop in the number of call handlers or an increase in the number of calls, then they could have an arrangement for calls to be picked up by a partner service. And through taking approaches like that, we can start to craft resilience right through the whole Telecare system and really kind of support services to help each other. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. What I've hoped I've been able to show you this morning is that the cloud-based nature of what we're seeking to achieve with the shared ARC platform is absolutely key, both to helping services transition before the digital switch-off, but also of really starting to get the whole sector ready for the future, getting rid of some of the barriers which currently plague it and opening the road for new innovations. So thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to take any questions. Yeah.
Lots of work with the public sector, both inside as a buyer, but also outside as a supplier. When you're looking at doing a delivery that is innovative, how do you stop that traditional problem you get where the procurement process hasn't been innovative in such a way that it allows you to buy things properly and has frequently in the past resulted in good ideas going bad at implementation stage because you can't get the right suppliers to buy into it?
Brilliant. So just to repeat for the recording, the questions around how can we ensure that our procurement approach is suitably innovative enough that we can ensure that the industry partner we get is actually going to deliver and work with us across the duration. And it is something which has been really concerning us and something we were given a lot of thought to. I think we've got two ways of approaching this. So the first, we've been really clear with the industry from the start that this is what we're looking at, and we've built it into our specification. So we have a whole section around development and innovation, getting them to show us how they would kind of approach creating a pipeline and how they would approach that. That is well and good, and you'd expect to see it, but it is likely to just result in warm words. People will say that's no problem, but will they deliver? The way we're getting around it is really, it goes back to what I kind of briefly mentioned about APIs. And ultimately what we want is a system which is open. So we're looking at open protocols, we want open APIs. And the reason this is relevant to this discussion is it does give us that option to bring in innovation from out with that one supplier. So we don't want to end up kind of locked into an arrangement where they're the only people who can innovate, and having that open access to the system gives us the flexibility to work with other organizations, SMEs, and bring in innovation from outside if we find that relationship isn't working, or if somebody's got something better that's out there.
I think it's reassuring as a 60-something-year-old that this is planned ahead for the next 10, 20 years. But I've got an 85-year-old mother. She's not very IT literate, but it does concern me that BT and all their powers charge her £45 for the privilege of having the pipeline for all this technology. So I just wondered, is there any thoughts to persuade the likes of the broadband service providers to come on board to provide maybe even a free service for people of a certain age to enable this all to happen?
So the questions around, I think what we'd maybe call no one being left behind, so making sure that everybody has equitable access to things like an internet connection and how we deal with the disparity of people being forced to pay large amounts for an internet connection for relatively basic services like Telecare to run through it, if that's a fair summation. So there's a few different ways. Firstly, I would absolutely agree with you that part of this, there has to be some form of basic service package there which can be available to everybody in the same way as at the moment with the copper wires. Even if you've not got set up a phone line, you should still be able to make emergency calls and the like. So we need to make sure that there is some level of minimum provision. Equally, the way in which Telecare can be delivered gives us a range of different options there as well. So while one option is indeed plugging into the internet, at the moment it's not actually our preferred option, largely because of the issue around things like power cuts. So if that router goes off, then the Telecare connection drops. So at the moment our preferred option is through what we'd call GSM devices, which have a SIM card in them. So it kind of removes that need for the user to actually have their own kind of internet connection or phone line, and the services can continue to be provided that way. And this isn't a kind of a new issue, if you will. And even up until now, services have typically found that there are some people who didn't want to pay for a phone line. And for people in that situation as well, often having that kind of SIM-enabled unit was one way to kind of get around that and make sure that these are accessible.
Hi. Just a question about what's next. Do you intend to share that data with the NHS, because they would be the biggest beneficiary of this?
So the question was, what's next? Do we plan to share that data with the NHS? So at this point, I'm hoping my boss isn't listening, because I'm just going to go off the script and give you my kind of utopian view for the future. I think the shared arc is really interesting, and it's a way forwards, and it's a way for us to bring in that standardization. But what I would see as being absolutely critical next is the creation of a data exchange layer for the health and social care sector for sure, but maybe even the whole public sector in Scotland. If I could have whatever I wanted, it would be based around citizen-held records. But the idea being that if we can get all of that data into one place, there's so much we can be doing with it. Telecare services gather some really interesting things, but if you have a data exchange which is pulling in things like consumer technology, so I've got my activity monitor on my wrist, if you've got all of that data coming into one pot, then the amount you could do with that with AI, predictive analytics, kind of looking in to really take a preventative approach to health and care, spotting indicators of issues before they happen, is absolutely enormous. So I would, data, we've still got a long way to go, but that would be my dream for the future, would be that kind of data exchange layer. And if we can do that through citizen-held records, which puts citizens in charge of their own data, then that would, again, be what I would really hope we'll see in the next decade.
And just touching on the previous comment, are you preparing for that future?
Not just yet, but that is definitely there are a number of organisations like the Digital Health and Care Institute in Glasgow who have started looking at the kind of practicalities behind it. So some of the initial work has started, but we haven't started procuring yet.
Just to interject, there is a Scottish Government programme that's been spun up in the last year looking at that central record. And it does have a large digital